Welcome, everyone. My name is Laura MacDonald, and I am the Director of Professional Learning here at NCEA. Thank you for joining us for a brief overview of NSBECS second edition. I know a lot of you have been waiting for this. Before we begin, 3 quick details. If you haven't noticed already, we are recording, and that is so you can go back and watch it later. You can share it with others, and we can share it. And if you're watching us asynchronously, welcome to you as well. If you have any questions during this presentation, feel free to use the Q&A. We use it just like a chat, except it says Q&A. Michelle will be monitoring, as will I, as we go through, and we'll do our best to answer your questions throughout this session and at the end as well. And speaking of the end, at the end of this session, I will share a link for an online survey and how to receive a certificate of completion for this webinar. So we know that the national standards for benchmarks for effective Catholic elementary and secondary school, NSBECS second edition, you're here to hear how they've stayed the same, what changes have been made, and what is the timeline for revised tools. And our speaker today is our expert in this area, Michelle Leah. Michelle, welcome. Before I turn it over to Michelle, let us begin as we begin all things in prayers. Please join me in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God of life and love, open my heart and mind to the abundance of your blessings. Open my eyes to your presence among us. Open my ears to the sound of your voice. Open my hands so I can serve others. Open my mind to learning and knowledge. Open my imagination so I can grow in wisdom and joy. Open my heart so I can grow in faith. Help me to respond to the gift of your love. Amen. And now, Michelle, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to share my screen so that you can see slides, which will be helpful. Welcome to a brief overview of NSBECS second edition. You can access the PDF. There are a couple of ways to do so, but you can access it from the QR code on the bottom left of your screen. You can also use the QR code on the bottom right to access the slides, and then you can use the hyperlink in the yellow box on the bottom left. You can also access them going to ncea.org, clicking on shop, and then you can download a copy of the PDF for free if you're a member, or you can purchase a hard copy of the standards as well. My name is Michelle Leah. I am the chair of the NNAC, which is the NCEA NSBECS Advisory Council. We were the group that completed the revisions in 2023 in January. I am also one of the co-directors of the Greeley Center for Catholic Education at Loyola University Chicago. And Loyola University and Boston College were the 2 founding universities who really spearheaded the creation of the first edition of the NSBECS, thanks to Dr. Lorraine Ozar and Dr. Patty Weitzel-O'Neill. A couple of additional resources for the NSBECS for you. If you're watching this in August of 2023, Mary Camp will be hosting a webinar. NCEA hosting, Mary Camp will be the webinar speaker. She's from the Florida Catholic Conference, and she's going to talk to those of you who are regular and experienced users of the NSBECS about how to use them, how to use the standards. And that webinar will be recorded and will be available to all NCEA members on the NCEA website. There will also be additional recordings that will be uploaded to the NCEA website, one for each domain, and that will happen by September of 2023. And then another resource are monographs that have been printed and published by NCEA, which you can access in their shop as well. So our agenda for this short recording will be to talk a little bit about the first edition and how NSBECS came to be. That will be a quick elevator pitch. And then we'll talk about how the second edition changes were made, what changes were made or not made, and then what are the next steps. So briefly, the first edition was published in 2012. As I mentioned, that was spearheaded by Lorraine Ozar at the Greeley Center for Catholic Education at Loyola University Chicago and Patty Weitzel-O'Neill at Boston College. They emerged from the group of other university folks through the CHESS organization, Catholic Higher Ed Helping Catholic Pre-K through 12 Schools. In the conversation, I think that happened in 2010, we talked about how universities could support pre-K through 12 schools, and the standards turned out to be one of those ways. So how were changes made? So prior to COVID, there was an NNC, which was the NCEA NSBECS Council, and that was for a time it was led by Jill Annable, but led by NCEA. And then we added advisory to our name, and Mary Camp and Ron Fussell and I became the executive committee, along with other Catholic school principals, superintendents, university people, and NCEA staff. We made revisions over 3 years. We sought feedback from principals and superintendents for 6 weeks in November and December of 2022 through a Qualtrics survey. I believe we got 117 responses, and we read over that information. We categorized, organized the information. We read through everything. We obviously didn't make every change that was suggested, but we certainly read it, and it was very helpful to our revision process. We finalized the revision in January of 2023, and then between January and June of 2023, edits were made. So not revisions, but just, grammar usage, punctuation, those kinds of things. I want to say a thank you to Margaret Kaplow, who has the patience of a saint, who was she was instrumental in getting this document to look as good as it does, but also to read as clearly as it does. So as I mentioned, there's also a hard copy available in the NCEA store. In regard to the second edition, it's important to note that Lincoln Snyder, the president and CEO of NCEA, as well as the president of NCEA's board, Bishop Kikanis, approved this document. And Mary Pat Donahue from the United States Council of Catholic Bishops is also on the NCEA board, and they approved it to be a doctrinally sound document. And another note is that in the document in 2022, which talks about how Catholic schools are schools for all, especially the weakest, that statement was something that really inspired and encouraged the NNAC as we were making revisions, in particular to Standard 7 in the academic excellence domain. What hasn't changed, firstly, are the defining characteristics, which you see in the right on the screen here in the blue box. For those of you who are users of the NSBECS, these are the Roman numeral pages in the first edition, so before Domain 1 starts and after the introduction. Another thing that didn't change, we talked and discussed the possibility of changing from the term parents to families, because we know in Catholic schools around the United States that grandmas, grandpas, aunts, uncles, great-grandmas, great-grandpas are raising children, the children in our schools. But because we wanted to stay with what is the language of the church documents, we stayed with parents. You will find the term families in the standards, but the prevalent term is parents. And then standards 11, 12, and 13 were streamlined and revised, but there were a few significant changes to the content. And you'll notice as we go through and the new versions of the standards, that in some cases it was a strong verb that was changed and not really the content. So speaking of what changes were made, so additions of more recent church documents was one goal. As I stated, the first edition was published in 2012, and it's been 13 years. And so, or excuse me, 11 years. So we wanted to make sure that in 2023 that we were using documents that are more recent. So for example, Fratelli Tutti is referenced, and there are other documents in the late 2010s, early 2020s that are used. We removed 21st century learning because we're fully in the 21st century. We also removed and revised some older uses of words that were in reference to technology and other things. So we modernized if it didn't sound like it was in the 21st century. We wanted to be clearer about including students who have diverse learning needs, and that statement from the document in 2022 about how Catholic schools are for all, especially the weakest, we wanted to make sure that we were clear about the language about inclusive diverse learners. In the governance domain, we shifted to talk about local ordinary because we know not all schools are run by congregations. So we wanted to be clear about that. The use of the phrase Catholic social teaching and the components of that are also referenced. So that's a new addition. Some smaller, well, they're really not small, but important things. We added the word Christ 4 more times in the original edition. The word Catholic appears 7 more times. And any term throughout the second edition that we even slightly thought could need to be defined, we defined it in the glossary. So the glossary has been updated. And when possible, we used church documents in the definitions to make sure that it was clear that we got these terms from the church documents, and we didn't just as an NNAC decide for them to be in this document, in the second edition. And then finally, in some cases, the content wasn't really changed, but the verbs were stronger and clearer, so that it was more about, instead of a passive verb, that it was really more active. And that was so that the stronger verbs, and then also dividing some of the benchmarks in one benchmark into 2 benchmarks, was so that things could be more clearly measured. So as schools are using these standards for accreditation or just for school improvement, that it was easier to see evidence, and it was clearer where you were on the rubric in terms of that. So we're going to go through now each of the 4 domains, and you'll see on the left is the old document, you'll see on the right is the second edition, and in red are the changes that were made. So you'll see here that the mission and Catholic identity, domain 1, that the old preamble to that standard, those standards, and the new have no change. So if you're a new user, it's new to you anyway. If you're a seasoned user, then you'll see that there is no change to that preamble. So you see here on the left is the first edition, on the right is the second edition. You see that 1.6, that information has been added so that Catholic identity is applied across, so that it's not just mission statement, for example, but it's also supplemental materials like a school motto. If you look up at 1.1, the school's charism or character has also been added, because that is an important part of Catholic schools. And curriculum and instruction facilitating encounters with Jesus Christ has been added. Christ-centered, discipleship, growing closer to Christ, those important additions have been made to standard 3 in domain 1. And then finally in standard 4, you see again, Christ-centered and missionary discipleship has been added there. Here you do see families is used instead of parents, because parent and guardian was used previously in benchmark 4.2. And then looking at 4.6, the making sure that faculty and staff faith formation is taken into consideration and put at the forefront as well. Domain 2 is government governance and leadership. You see here that that preamble has also not been changed, so that is no change. You see here that on standard, the first edition is on the left, second edition is on the right. And you see that 5.1 has been cut in half and clarified more with some stronger verbs. Just a reminder too, that any word that's in this document that needed defining, church documents were used to support those definitions. Here you see in 5.4 that the local ordinary is used instead of necessarily a bishop. That is the terminology that's used in church documents. And then 5.7 and 5.8 have been added to make sure that there are some clear and strong action steps that leadership teams can take. Standard 6, we see that 6.5 has been revised to include the Catholic identity of the leadership team and their continuous improvement. And then 6.9 in talking about the sustainability of the school's mission and vision has been added. Domain 3, academic excellence. This is where a chunk of the changes were made. You can see the preamble has been changed to be updated to more current church documents, including that Fratelli Tutti document and the document from 2017. So in addition to the 2005 document. One of the changes in standard 7 was to be clearer about what it means to be aligned to standards, to what kind of standards? So professionally accepted and research-based. And then in 7.1, that those, the idea of the vertical and horizontal alignment, which is defined in the glossary, making sure that curriculum is integrated with a Catholic worldview. And then it was separated out that classroom instruction is engaging and motivating to each student. And then 7.5 talks about being a user of technology. So the previous 7.3 used some older terms, and so we modernized that and added that standard, revised that standard in 7.5. 7.6 and 7.7 are two of the standards where inclusion of students with diverse learning needs are addressed. So you see the executive function in 7.6 and then accommodation and modification in 7.7. And then also making sure that faculty and staff get professional learning in terms of culturally responsive pedagogy, which is defined using church documents in the glossary. Standard 8, it goes into greater detail about what student data can be used and how it can be used to make progress and for student growth. And then the term ancillary services from the first edition has been clarified, and then there's additions to that standard as well. Finally, domain 4, operational vitality. Here, the main change from the old preamble to the new was in indent, so that it was a little clearer to be able to read. And you can see here that the change from a religious order to a religious sponsor was changed. The revised standard 10 has some stronger verbs in it, so that is clearer, and the rubrics will reflect that. And this domain had the brain power of some NCEA staff members and some other some other people, including former and current superintendents, so that in using the language of budgeting and finance was clearer in this domain. And then standard 11, you can see that Catholic social teaching, particularly dignity of work, has been added and clarified. Fair and equitable salaries has been added. Catholic social teaching here is added to standard 12. And then you see some stronger and clearer verbs that are changed in standard 13 as well. So next steps in terms of the NSBECS second edition, the website is being revised. NCEA's website is being revised. There is a NSBECS part of that site, and that is being revised so that the new standards can be accessed there. For right now, as I mentioned, you can go to ncea.org and click on shop, where you can download a free PDF if you're a member, or you can buy a hard copy. The rubrics, surveys, worksheets, and other support documents, the ones that everybody wants the most, are currently being revised. We are working, as we did in our revision of the standards, we're working in our domain groups to revise those. And as soon as those are complete, they will be posted to the NCEA website. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Here is my email at Loyola. I'm happy to answer any questions on behalf of the NNAC. If I don't have an answer, I'll direct it to the NNAC or to NCEA. Thank you so much for your time.
As Michelle said, we'd love to see you next Tuesday, August 22nd at 1 p.m. Eastern for using the NSBECS for continuous improvement. You can sign up as you can for all of our webinars on our NCEA website under professional development. Again, thank you for your time and have a lovely day.